Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Naturals Fails channel. I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded, but I'll be honest, work's been kicking my ass. So I had to take a little break. Hopefully, I'll be coming back with hopefully some more consistent videos if the inspiration strikes me. But today, I was inspired to make a video based off of a conversation I had on the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Reddit. The post in question is one called An Alternate Gunslinger, a homebrew of a variant version of the class Gunslinger, created by a Redditor named Pterodax68. In this homebrew, Pterodax put forth the idea of making it so that gunslingers from very first level would have an increased chance of landing a critical hit based on rolling a natural number, basically increasing the critical range. So instead of a guaranteed critical hit or a guaranteed increase in your success, would not just only happen on a 20, as is the case for standard Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but also on 19, and that number would only increase as you got to higher levels. The idea behind this would be to make gunslingers more effective, and one of the hardest variations of a Pathfinder 2nd Edition encounter, the solo boss. I had my own opinions on this. I'm not going to get into this, especially in this video. If you are really interested on my takes, you can go on my Reddit account. You can find my comments and what I had to say about it. But today, it made me consider what does it mean to take on a solo boss, the hardest encounter type in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. How should a dungeon master use this kind of encounter? How should a party approach tackling this kind of enemy? That's what inspired me to take this video, and that is going to be the subject for today's conversation. So before we get into the video proper, shout out to Pterodax for giving me something to think about. Might not have agreed with that particular homebrew, but man, I think we should really, as a community, work together to just being more accepting of embracing homebrew. We don't have to agree with what other people want to introduce in their game. It doesn't really matter. As long as everyone's having fun playing this amazing tabletop game, I really don't care what rules get changed. But in light of that, let's go ahead and start talking about the solo boss encounter. So, first off, I want to talk about this from a game master perspective. Game masters are going to be the people who interact with this boss and design this type of encounter. First, you're going to be the first player to interact with this, decide if it needs to go into your game, decide if it's appropriate for your party to tackle. So if you're a player, I'm going to have Menthu put up a timestamp for when I start talking about players and how a party should best approach a solo boss encounter. If you don't want to hear all this DM talk, but if you would like to listen, or if you're a DM, I encourage you to follow along with me. So, first off, I'm sure for the well initiated, you would know that solo boss encounters are one of the toughest encounters because they have so much just bigger numbers, really. And that's what it boils down to. If you look at any solo boss, the reason why they are a threat is because statistically, to have an appropriate challenge, a solo enemy will need to be a couple levels above the party. And if they are a couple levels above the party, that means the party will not be able to hit or crit the enemy nearly as often, and that enemy will be able to crit and hit more often, and thus increasing their damage. So, to quantify this, luckily, the people at Paizo gave us an amazing encounter rule set. Basically, your one shot ball for knowing how to balance any encounter in the game for your party. And if you are a new DM, I would highly recommend making yourself very comfortable with this page on the Archives of Nethys. And I'm going to have, once again, Menthu throw up that chart and we'll go ahead and talk about it. So, as you can see here, when looking at the XP budget, you will see that there are 5 different types of an encounter: a trivial, a low, a moderate, a severe, and an extreme. Solo boss enemies encompass the severe and extreme level threats. So what we have here is these are the two highest encounters. To give you an idea of what Paizo views as a severe and extreme encounter, I'm going to go ahead and read out to you what their thing or what their description is on Archives of Nethys and by extension the core rulebook. A severe level threat are encounters that are the hardest encounters most groups of characters can consistently defeat. These encounters are most appropriate for important moments in your story, such as confronting a final boss, bad luck, poor tactics, or a lack of resources due to prior encounters can easily turn a severe threat encounter against the parties, and a wise group keeps options to disengage open. So, already right here, we get this idea that severe level encounters are fights that the party needs to use good tactics for. You need to be able to come in strategically, and even then, sometimes bad luck can be enough to make you have to run away. However, it gets more interesting when we look at the extreme threat definition, which is encounters that are so dangerous that they are likely to be an even match for the characters, particularly if the characters are low on resources. This makes them too challenging for most uses. An extreme encounter might be appropriate for a fully rested group of characters that can go all out for a climactic encounter at the end of a campaign or for a group of veteran players using advanced tactics and teamwork. So, again, this is highlighting the fact that if you throw an extreme encounter at a party, your players are going to have to come at this with strategy in mind. So, this brings us to the question, what can a severe encounter or an extreme encounter look like? Let's go ahead and turn our attention to choosing creatures, the creature XP and roll table, which again, I will have up on the screen now. As you can see here, this table shows what a creature's level is, how much XP it will give, and what their suggested roll is. You will see here that a creature that is just equal to your party's level is a standard creature or a low threat boss. So that means typically, as a DM, you want to make sure that you are throwing a lot of monsters that are actually below your player's level, and usually multiple of them. This is going to give you the easiest kind of encounter. But again, if you throw too many of them, as we can see the EXP that each of those monsters are worth, that's how we're going to plug it into our encounter budget uh, table, and that's how we're going to figure out if we are or what kind of threat level we are at. Now, for solo bosses in particular, you will notice that if we look at the party level +3 and party level +4, just one creature can account for the entire EXP budget for an encounter. A monster that is 3 levels above the party will be a severe encounter on their own, and a party level 4 +4 monster is equal to an extreme threat. Now, that we've gotten that sorted out, the next thing to keep in mind is the different types of extreme and severe encounters. There is one that the enemies have a greater action economy advantage over the players. These are going to be severe and extreme encounters that are filled with monsters that are under the player's level. For example, if you were to throw 16 -4 enemies at the party, that would be an extreme encounter. This is because the action economy advantage is so heavily favored for the enemy side that the players are going to have to make every action count and to take out as many of these monsters as quickly as possible before they are overwhelmed. Even if they are not likely crit by these monsters, they are still likely to be scratched. And as they say, you can die from 1,000 needle pokes. However, on the other side of that pendulum, we have the extreme threat solo boss, one monster that represents all 160 EXP. This is dangerous not because this enemy has an action economy advantage, but because it has a number advantage. This means that the party is going to have to spend all of their actions just trying to overcome the extreme high level AC to actually deal damage to the monster, or to spend a bunch of resources to recover when this monster releases its devastating attacks. And this is the encounter that we care about for this video. When it comes to these creatures, your players are going to need tactics. They're going to need to know how to trip, how to grapple, how to reposition, how to use spell slots effectively, and how to, in general, play support. This is something that new players will struggle with, or especially at lower levels where the party's supportive options are not nearly as robust as they are in late game. That makes these encounters even harder than an extreme encounter that is just 16 mooks, because the solution to 16 mooks is to do as much DPS as possible and a ton of area of effects, which is something that players are already used to doing. You can see that players, and this may not be true for every table, but it's certainly true from my experience, that players tend to enjoy inflicting damage. They like to see big number and big damage happen. Players are not, especially new players, are not going to be attuned to how a -1 or a +1 is benefiting another person's damage output, or in fact your own damage output. Therefore, parties in general tend to look at how we can deal as much damage as possible, killing the enemy without thinking, how can we weaken the enemy or buff our allies so that we can make this encounter easier? Because of this player bias that tends to happen, and again, as I said before, this is not for all tables, but as this tends to happen, that means when you have an encounter where the party needs to change their normal tactics and need to support each other, they're going to get wiped out and they're going to die and they're going to feel bad because none of their attacks are hitting. So, as a dungeon master, what I'm going to say is do what Paizo says in regards to when you should have these fights. Severe encounters should be saved for final bosses, and extreme encounters should be left for when the party has full resources and when the party is able to use fantastic tactics to overcome that extreme threat. With what has been said, I wanted to be clear. A solo boss encounter, especially a extreme or a severe one, while it may represent the pinnacle of challenge in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, let's face it, not everyone wants to be challenged in that way all the time. What I am going to recommend to DMs, only use it if it's going to be appropriate for your table, if your table is going to have fun with it. At the end of the day, there's just some people and some tables and some players who are just not going to enjoy being curb stomped by a solo boss encounter and needing to engage with a supportive role. There's some tables that very much would prefer to be able to all be individual badasses. And if that's your table, let that happen. Let that be their story to tell. I know that sometimes as a dungeon master, we like to make our players go, oh shit, and shit themselves, right? Out of fear of what's coming next. But let's make sure that we're targeting the gameplay to our players where our players are at, essentially. Because at the end of the day, if our players hate the encounters that we're running, think it's bullshit, they're not having fun with it, it's going to be harder for us to enjoy it when they gripe at us because we made the encounter too difficult. And that's something to keep in mind before you throw in a severe or extreme solo level boss at your party. Now, for my more player side, what can a party do against a extreme solo boss? Well, the answer is simple. Unlike other tabletop role playing games, especially a particular Dungeons and Dragons, you see that Pathfinder plays at a different axis, where something like 5th edition, your players are more individually powerful. That means players and you will be looking for how you can contribute the most DPS. Pathfinder 2nd edition, especially at this much harder level, is not that kind of game. Instead, it is a game about how you can set someone else up or how you can turn the number game to the player's advantage by taking the myriad of support actions that the game gives you. For example, instead of a fighter going for their first attack and just trying to swipe at the monster, it might be better for that marshal to instead try to trip. If you succeed on that trip, that means each attack that comes forward will now get a effective +2 because the enemy is off guard, taking a -2 to their AC. Or you can grab, which does the same thing. These are important because grab targets fortitude and tripping targets reflex. Therefore, you can usually find a way to target a monster not with their best save. If you're targeting an extreme monster with their best save, it's not gonna work. Menthu, please show them some of the outrageous numbers a level 25 monster can have on its strongest save. Sorry, you're not beating that. So, that means that you have to work together. Let's start off with how turn order matters. Remember, players, you are allowed to hold your action and restructure your action economy to be more effective against a solo boss. For example, it would usually be smart to have a spellcaster start first. Spellcasters will have a myriad of debuffing spells or buffing spells, depending on what situation is needed. If they get to go first in initiative, that means their buff or their debuff will impact everybody else that comes after them. Usually, the monster is able to reduce this on their turn, or it will go down on the spellcaster's next turn. So you have the spellcaster go first. They throw down a buff, they throw down a debuff. Then you have someone who can do an athletic maneuver. This is going to be a grapple or a trip or something of that nature. You do that, and hopefully, with a debuff or a buff, you are now swinging the numbers in advantage. So, let's say the spellcaster throws a fear spell, and luckily, the solo boss failed, and therefore is frightened too, and now has a -2 to everything. That means the marshal who comes next is now able to easily grab or trip the monster, depending on what they want to do, and stack another -2 to AC. That means that marshal now, even though they have map, they effectively only have a -1 to that attack. Therefore, you can still maybe get some damage on the board. So let's say you do that, you run over, you trip, those are your actions, you go to the next person. It's now the barbarian's turn. The barbarian, having a very high flat damage, can come in, smash that enemy, and unlike before, will maybe now have a chance to crit, therefore adding more damage than if the spellcaster had just thrown out a cantrip. The other marshal, let's say a fighter for this example, went out and tried to just slash twice, and then the barbarian goes. Statistically, you are now more likely to do damage on top of whatever more allies you might have on the situation with more buffs and more things to add to the mix. This is where party tactics becomes important. So, what you should think as solo boss encounters, they are not only the most difficult challenge that you can face as a party, but it also challenges you to change how you engage with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Instead of trying to simply be a DPS check, how much damage can you push into a single round, it now becomes how can I support my allies so that we can make that damage? It changes the game from how can I be individually powerful to how can I help my party be powerful. And that comes to the end of the video. A very simple, a sort of admittedly rambly video. But I think that talking about game design like this, especially when it comes to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, is very fun for me. I quite enjoy conversing with people and discussing about how game design can be approached and that sort of thing. And I really like what Pathfinder 2nd Edition does, making what is normally a win at character creation kind of genre, especially with D20 fantasy games, at least the most popular versions, into a tactical composition game. You don't win at character creation, You win at what you do in a combat. And I hope that for some newer players, that you have learned a little bit something about how to engage with some of the harder fights that Pathfinder 2nd Edition has to offer. And I hope that for returning or veteran players, that this gives you something to think about. The fact that, yeah, as much as we like talking about White Room math and DPS, sometimes it's more about the supportive actions than anything else. Well, thank you very much for listening today. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, we'll get some more videos out to you in the upcoming future. We actually have a video series that we're waiting for some art assets to be completed, so I got my fingers crossed we'll have that done at some point. I'm not rushing the artist, just going to let it happen as it happens. But once it does, I hope you're looking forward to that video where we will be diving more into game design. I'm not going to spoil too much for you, but please be on the lookout for that and other videos, especially with more Pathfinder 2nd Edition books coming out in the future. I am going to be here and ready to talk to them. So please leave a like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and remember, try to avoid those nat ones. Thank you very much.